Get ready to rumble. Shilling Show Unleashed on the Seven Thunders Media Network. Former city councilor, husband, father, and community watchdog. Your host, Rob Shilling.
Welcome to the Shilling Show Unleashed podcast. Remember, your direct support makes our show possible, and you can directly support this podcast by visiting shillingshow.com and then clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page to make a monthly contribution. We appreciate your support. Today's topic will be Thanksgiving. Although by the time you're hearing this, the day Thanksgiving will have passed, it's so important to reflect on the things that we're thankful for and that we have to be thankful for. We can get lost in all of the things that we're experiencing right now in this country, in our own lives, and be upset and be concerned, be frightened and fearful. But if we have a heart, an attitude of gratitude, that will benefit us in our lives. I remember some time ago I attended a faith retreat, and the topic was the attitude of gratitude. And I've never forgotten it because up to that time, I'd never really considered it. And it struck me as so profound that grateful people are not angry. They do not have a heart of anger. Grateful people don't expect. They're happy for what they get. They may anticipate things, but they don't expect them. And there's a big difference there. Grateful people are willing to accept that sometimes things don't always go their way, but the good things that they have around them, they can see them very clearly, and they're thankful for them. It's one reason why in raising my own family that I have always taught my kids to say thank you. Sometimes people look at me when I tell them, say thank you. Oh, no, it's okay. No, I want my kids to be grateful. I want them to remember that thank you is a very important phrase. And isn't it obvious when we meet people who are grateful, that we know that if we ever stop to think about it, that they have this calm demeanor, that their hearts are at peace, that you know that they're grateful just by the way they compose themselves and just by the way that they interact with others. If you think about it when you meet somebody like that, it's just beautiful. And yet in all of this, in our Thanksgiving celebration, we see the left, the American left, the satanic, demonic left, attempting to undermine and destroy not only the day Thanksgiving, but the country and the gratitude that we have had, that we express on Thanksgiving, but that we should have every day. You've seen things like the renaming, commercial renaming. Remember when we were kids, they started calling it Xmas instead of Christmas. Well, now they're calling it Friendsgiving. Now, that's a cute little phrase. It's kind of like calling it Turkey Day, but Thanksgiving is named Thanksgiving for a reason. And we should never lose track of the foundation of this holiday and the purpose of it. The left and their allies are generating resentment and division in the country for their own political power. And again, this undermines the attitude of gratitude. We see the encouragement of racial and ethnic withdrawal from the celebration of Thanksgiving. It's very sad, but there are leftist groups in America who are encouraging other groups, hey, you've got nothing to be thankful for. You should hate and despise this country, and therefore don't celebrate Thanksgiving. And now we're seeing things coming out, even from local government. For those who are celebrating Thanksgiving, it's just ridiculous, but this is the place we've come to. And of course, we have this push, this massive push across America to break and destroy family traditions in the name of fear. Because we have COVID amongst us, we shouldn't be meeting with our families, not only at Thanksgiving, but Christmas. Imagine if they're able to break this tradition permanently and that people become detached from their families and detached from their family traditions. You know, it starts somewhere. It appears to me that has already begun. What we should be doing instead is in this time of Thanksgiving to consider the things that we're thankful for. And one of the things we should always remember is that we are thankful to be Americans. Being born in America, what a privilege it is. And since most of us were not born in other places, but if you were, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I have to look at this generationally from my own grandmother who came here from Italy. Grateful to her dying day to be an American and to be in America. So we have to be thankful for this place. And as you look around, and I love these pictures that you see sometimes, the videos that show the bounty of our land. I remember seeing the cornucopia when I was a kid, pictured in some of the Thanksgiving illustrations, and not really understanding why that was significant. But to see this bounty spread out on a table at a Thanksgiving dinner, or to look across the fields that grow the bounty of the land and see the cornfields or the wheat fields just blowing in the wind in a sunrise, it's a beautiful sight, and it really says a lot about how God has blessed America. It makes me sad for the amount of food that's thrown away on a holiday like Thanksgiving, but I suppose all of that waste just shows us how bountiful we are, and also that we ought to be grateful for the food that we have and the other bounty of the land. I'm thankful for the Judeo-Christian foundations of America, that our founders were so brave to found this as a Christian nation, although not all of them were devout Christians. But many of them were, and they saw God's hand in all of it. And just think how different the nation would have been. I don't believe we'd be here right now if we had not been a Judeo-Christian nation. It's so obvious how God has blessed and protected and helped this country just survive over these centuries of our existence. And without God's provision, we would not have survived. I'm thankful for the individual relationship I have with my Creator. And all of us should be thankful for that if we have it. And if we don't, we should be seeking it. It's at the center of everything. And thinking about the Creator, we must look at creation not as something to be worshipped, but as something to look at and to worship the Creator over, because the magnificence of creation, as you go to the ocean or as you behold the mountains, or just looking around you at the trees, at the deserts, at the many, many manifestations of creation that surround us, the universe and the stars, it is absolutely breathtaking. I'm thankful in this country for our military, who over the years have fought to protect our freedoms, to protect the homeland, and they don't get enough of our gratitude. I'm thankful for the ones who put their lives on the line to protect us and to keep us safe in difficult situations. They suffer a lot. They do it quietly. They don't complain about it. Boy, do I have gratitude for them. I'm extremely and profoundly grateful for the medical care that we have in this country. And imagine being in a place that didn't have this sort of thing. We take for granted many times that we can just run over to the doctor's office or go to the hospital for a procedure, that we're going to get good care. Think about our comfortable and, by world standards, extravagant homes and domiciles, the places that we live. Sometimes we might complain or grouse, it's not big enough, it's not in the right location. As one who has traveled internationally and has seen what people live like in other countries, particularly what is the basic house, the size of a kitchen, what are the bedrooms like, we are in comfortable extravagance here in America. We should be grateful for it every day. And of course, the interpersonal relationships, those of our friends, our families, spouses, children, parents, siblings, relatives. It's so wonderful to spend time together and to be grateful for the people that surround us, even the people that we work with and others that we encounter on a daily basis. We are to have fellowship with people around us, and it is a wonderful thing. I think about our great freedoms in this country, granted to us by God, and the government that is instituted to protect the ability for us to speak freely in this nation, to speak out when things are wrong, and to speak gratitude when things are going well, to assemble. And we see some of these things being abridged right now, but the underlying rights are provided by God, and they will survive. And we see in certain countries a great contrast of our ability to exercise our faith in America versus others who have to hold their church services in hidden places because they're fearful that they will be imprisoned or worse. I'm thankful for the many comforts that we have through electricity and technology, making our lives easier. These are such important things, and we grow to take them for granted because they're around us all the time. But as we talk to people from previous generations who didn't grow up with some of the things that we have, they really and truly appreciate these things, and we ought to maintain those relationships and talk to people about the way things were so that we can have gratitude for the way things are. These are hard times in America right now. We have violent insurrections going on in places around the country, scheming, godless politicians who obviously worship power and are not grateful people. We have the continuing slaughter of the unborn, although we presently have a president and many people in this nation who've been praying against this and working against this, but it is a reality in America. And given the political situation that we may be facing in the coming years, the slaughter of the unborn may well continue in America. And then people are being touched by economic turbulence. Maybe this is just all a chance for us to sit back and say, look how good we've had it. Turn to God and just ask him to heal our land. I think that's the best thing that we can do on this Thanksgiving, because we still must be grateful. The good that we see around us, if we only take the time to look, far outweighs the evil. And a heart of gratitude will bring us joy and contentment in spite of the circumstances that surround us. We have a lot to be thankful for. The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast continues in a moment.
Online at shillingshow.com.
BorderHawk.news is a one-stop shop with the latest news about immigration nationalism and globalism. The BorderHawk staff daily curates immigration news stories and, in the fashion of the Drudge Report, updates the site with cutting-edge content and original first-class commentary. BorderHawk.news highlights national and international media reports, tweets, and nuggets buried in local news blurbs, polls, video clips, and policy research. BorderHawk is pro-legal immigration, pro-rule of law, but against an unsecure border, as countless Americans have suffered violence at the hands of criminal illegal aliens. And an increasing number of Americans are concerned about how mass migration affects their daily life. BorderHawk.news will remain on the forefront of the immigration issue with a buffet of info to read, evaluate, and share. Bookmark BorderHawk.news. Add them on social media at BorderHawkNews on Twitter.
Community-supported investigative journalism. Schilling Show Unleashed.
The Schilling Show Unleashed continues with Bob Zadek, a radio talk host, author of the new book, Essential Liberty, Finding Freedom in a Post-COVID World. And Bob, welcome to the Schilling Show. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. You're very kind.
You start out the book by talking about essential liberty and Benjamin Franklin's concerns over our liberty. I think this is a very important place for us to start our conversation.
It is. Benjamin Franklin, when he left, we walked out after the 4.5 hard months of drafting the Constitution. It was really challenging, and it wasn't clear during the process that the 55 or so men, they were all men at the time, who worked so hard, were going to succeed. But they did, and they ended up with a constitution, a negotiated document full of compromises, but they had to build a country from scratch. And he left the closed session. It was very secret. Nobody knew what was going on. And a reporter interrupted or stopped Benjamin Franklin on his way out. He was the oldest of the founders at the Constitutional Convention, and they asked him, well, Dr. Franklin, what kind of a government have you given us? And he paused, but my voice may crack a little bit because I get emotional when I often think of the founders, and I apologize for that. But Dr. Franklin said, a republic, ma'am, if you can keep it. And those prescient words, if you can keep it, meant never before has a government been created on earth, never before on earth, which entrusted so much to the intelligence and the constant hard work of the voters, the citizens. And this was an experiment, a experiment which nobody knew how it was going to come out, but they were determined to try. And for 231 years, we have been learning if, in fact, we can keep it. And we find ourselves still being tested. It is fascinating to watch. It is fascinating to watch how the oldest national constitution on the planet is still operating. Sometimes one wonders what's going to happen, but it still is operating. They did a good job so far, and that's the start of the book. And the reason I chose that quote is because during the pandemic, when we experienced, as Americans, we experienced a deprivation of freedom, much of which was, as we're learning somewhat after the fact, was unconstitutional and illegal at the hands of the governors. We experienced a loss of freedom which we have never before on such a grand scale ever experienced. And the scary part is that Americans were somewhat passive and they accepted it, which is kind of scary. Not that they should have had a violent uproar, but there should have been more collective anger. And I felt that during the crisis, the pandemic crisis, which is still with us, but the end is clearly in sight, I felt that I was reminded of those words, if we can keep it, because on the state level, we experienced firsthand what a non-free government feels like, and it wasn't very pleasant.
It certainly wasn't. Of great concern, and it should be to all of us, because the words that you used were totally appropriate and important in maintaining our essential liberty. But how did we lose this concept? Bob Zadek, I believe if you went to a high school today and asked 100 kids, there'd be very few, if any, who even could attribute that quote.
That's a complicated question. In my 14 years of about 800 shows, I did a lot of shows on how we got there, because I was curious about that myself. You raised a very important question. And I've done lots of shows on the battle to control, of all things, textbooks. Textbooks have become profoundly politicized. And so it starts with American history being written out of the textbooks. I remember doing a show once when I learned that in certain parts of the country, American history textbooks start with the Civil War, and they do not include anything prior to that. So it is being taught out of us by the politicians who have learned once you control the history books and once you control the curriculum, you control, it takes time, but as those students under your control through the textbooks you write, as they become participating adults in democracy, well, you have them and they know nothing else. So it's a complicated question. A lot of it is education. A lot of it is simply that, as you know, this has been not even denied, the educational system has been captured by progressives, and therefore, and parents without knowing about it, because parents just don't have a way to drill down and know what their students are being taught. Their children are being, freedom is being taught out of the students and out of your children behind your back without you even knowing about it. And so that's one answer. The answer is more complicated than that, but that's a good place to start.
You know, I was having a conversation with my 12-year-old daughter this morning, and she told me that she had a friend who was celebrating the Biden victory, if that's what it is, by saying, "I'm proud to be an American." And I thought to myself, and I said to my daughter, I don't think this young lady knows what it means to be an American, or you would not be celebrating somebody who is probably going to do a lot of things that are against the Constitution and against American foundational principles.
You know, it's interesting. You raise for me, a very personal question and a hard question. It's almost painful for me to respond in a way, because proud to be an American. I ask myself, am I proud to be an American? Well, it depends on what America you mean. Am I proud of the concept of America, the concept of more personal freedom than any country has ever experienced, founding principles, all men are created equal, that founding principle, the principle that governments are established merely to protect our God-given rights. They are not established to give us rights. We have the rights before we had government. And so which America, or are we talking about the America of 2020 with its political structure, with the courts in danger, with the instruments of government being politicized? Well, I'm not so proud of 2020 America. I am moisty-eyed proud of founding principles. So I don't even know if I am proud of my country today. I'm certainly proud of where it was, very wary of where it's going. So that's a really hard question, at least it is to me.
Well, I'm with you. We're talking with Bob Zadek, a radio talk show host and author of Essential Liberty. Let's go to some of the specific COVID threats to our essential liberty. And I want to talk about the lockdowns, first of all. These have been so disastrous to so many people. They've caused such harm. How do you see it from your perspective? And could we have avoided all of this?
Well, two important questions. First of all, we have heard most public officials saying, let's leave it to science, which means I, an elected official in the executive branch, usually governors, mayors, and even the president, but the president is less at fault for what I'm about to say than mayors and governors. What mayors and governors have done, more so in the progressive states, Cuomo and Whitmer in Michigan, and New Jersey, Pennsylvania, California, of course. What they have done is their job is basically kind of easy. Being a governor, being a mayor, kind of an easy job. You get to boss a lot of people around, and it's almost hard to do a crummy job, but they manage to do it. So, but once in a while, you have to make a decision. And you have to go out there like a cornerback in pro football, and the spotlights are on you. And that scares the bejesus out of many elected officials. So what they do is they outsource the decision making, so they have a place to hide. And in the case of the COVID crisis, they hid behind people wearing white lab jackets with stethoscopes in the pocket, because they are father figures and the like, and they are authority figures. And after all, it is a pandemic, so why not hide behind doctors? So they outsource the decision making to doctors. Now, while I agree, any executive, anybody running any organization, including a family, you don't know everything and you have to outsource it. But the mistake was made, and this is kind of, sorry for the long-ish answer, but the mistake that was made was they only consulted doctors. As we know, the crisis was more than just a medical crisis. It was an economic crisis as well. And indeed, the long-term effects on the country will be more economic than medical. It's going to be harder for us to overcome the economic damage than the medical damage. And therefore, what the governors and mayors didn't do, they didn't consult with doctors, that they did, but they didn't consult with economists. And therefore, they made the mistake that Governor Cuomo did when he said, even one life is invaluable. Well, that's false. One life is not invaluable. And in fact, you have to make the decision, what's best overall for the country. And sometimes you have to pay less attention to the medical issues and more attention to the economic issues, instead of 100 medical and 0 economic. And that was the profound mistake that was made. And therefore, we will pay the price of that mistake for a very long time. And one more example, if I may.
Yes.
If Cuomo is correct, and to show you the utter sophistry in what he says, if he's correct, then he ought to be campaigning to criminalize automobile traffic. He ought to make driving illegal. Now, why do I say that? Because traffic fatalities in the U.S. are around 55,000 a year, which means if you felt saving even one life was important, you could save 55,000 lives. 55,000 lives by banning driving. Well, of course, nobody is going to do that because the other benefits of driving outweigh the 55,000 deaths. Similarly, the other benefits to no lockdown outweigh the health damage caused by the pandemic. That analysis, that hard analysis, was never done. Our governors behaved like sheep. They behaved like cowards. They took easy decisions, hiding behind strangers in lab coats, and we all will suffer.
Bob, it's really interesting. You mentioned that they were relying on the doctors. However, there were a number of doctors they didn't want to listen to. People like Dr. Simone Gold, who is America's frontline doctors, and a number of others who challenged these experts, Dr. Fauci and the rest of them. So how do we know whose science to believe, and why were certain doctors just totally ignored?
Well, you ask a question knowing the answer,
Yes.
of course, as I do. What you do is, when you are the chief executive, you pick and choose, you sort of solve for the answer, as we say.
Mm-hmm.
You decide the answer you want, and then you shop for a doctor who is credible on the one hand and who will give you the answer that you want on the other. Look what Biden is doing now with his pandemic inner circle. It's going to be Ezekiel,
Emmanuel.
I forgot his name now.
Emmanuel,
of course. Ezekiel Manuel, who advocates a 6 to 8 week lockdown nationally, even though it's probably unconstitutional. And we put it so you could shop around. You can always find doctors who will give you exactly what you want to hear, and then you have a perfect political cover. You can say, "Don't yell at me. I'm just listening to, quote, the science." Yeah, but which science? And that's how the public gets manipulated by the politicians who, for all of their shortcomings, they sure are good at being politicians.
Bob Zadek is our guest. Essential Liberty, Finding Freedom in a Post-COVID World. I want to go from the macro level to the micro level and talk about mask mandates, which are bothering a lot of people, but very few seem willing to stand up to it. What should people do when they're told to wear a mask, even though it may compromise them in some way?
Well, let's remember that government's primary job, at least in the opinion of the founders and in my opinion as a libertarian, is to protect me so that others don't do me harm. That's the primary role of government, to protect my life, my liberty, and my ability to pursue happiness. That's why governments are instituted. Those are the very words in the Declaration of Independence. So if we start with that premise, now we have certain rights granted to us in the Constitution and in the Bill of Rights, and we have lots of other rights that are unenumerated, but they are included even though not specifically mentioned. That's the starting point. Now, governments can deprive us of enumerated rights, but they have to do so. There are standards which the Supreme Court has set. The standards are the deprivation of rights has to be to accomplish a valid governmental goal. It has to be targeted, to be designed to accomplish that goal, and it has to be the least intrusive way to accomplish the goal. So those are the standards. Now, let's test it against masks. Compelling one to wear a mask is a violation of our liberty, our freedom not to wear a mask. So the question is it targeted? Well, it seems to be. Is it intrusive? Not very much so. Sure, it's a deprivation of some right. And if you say I have a right not to wear a mask, well, you're probably correct. But you also you start with a right of free speech, but that right of free speech is not unlimited. You cannot, as they say, yell fire in a crowded theater. Actually, you can, but people use that as an example. There are lots of rights that you are deprived by government. You have the right to print and publish whatever you wish. However, you have defamation statutes where you get punished if you do something that's defamatory. So the the rights you have are not unlimited. And the question is, where in the spectrum is the wearing of masks? Now, I happen to feel I jealously guard my liberties. I happen to feel it's kind of annoying and I sort of don't like it, but I am willing. I don't find it to be so much of an abridgment of my rights that I would protest against it. I would simply cooperate. But that's a personal opinion, and people can decide where they stand all across that spectrum. So you asked me the question because I'm your guest this morning. So my view is, yeah, it's kind of annoying, and I sort of think it's a little bit of theater, but I also suspect there is some medical basis, and I don't go out that much anyway because of the virus. I work from home. So I say I can live with it. That doesn't make me angry. But saying I can't have a haircut or go to a nail salon, saying I can't socialize with my friends, saying I can't worship in a group of believers of what I believe in, that crosses a line. And therefore, we all have to make our decision where the line is. And you asked about masks. That's my analysis, and that's my conclusion.
Let's take it a step further. Here in Virginia, where we broadcast from, the governor has asserted his authority to implement a mandatory vaccine. Does that cross a line from a libertarian and liberty perspective?
Boy, that's a hard decision. You pick decisions that are going to get the dander up in your listening audience. I'll tell you that. Once again, I really understand other people's. I understand why some people or how some people are anti-vaxxers. I understand that. It's a hard issue because let's take the example that's always given of young children, a parent sending their child to school. Now, a parent has a right to assume that the school is taking reasonable measures to protect their child from having harm suffered. That's the purpose of government. And if an unvaccinated child is carrying a disease, he might, without anybody knowing about it, harm the child sitting next to that child. And therefore, the parent who wants their child to be protected has had government let her down. So where the vaccination is required to protect one citizen from another doing its harm, I'm persuaded. Therefore, the middle ground for me, and you've just heard how I got here, the middle ground is no compulsory vaccination, but if a child or an adult is not vaccinated, people have to know about that, which kind of gets a little creepy. People have to know about it so I can protect myself from an unvaccinated person. If, on the other hand, once I am vaccinated, I am protected from the unvaccinated person, then maybe that's not necessary anymore. So the test is an innocent American at risk because somebody else makes a decision for whatever reason not to be vaccinated? I don't know how the science comes out, but that's at least a test I would apply.
I want to go now to the possibility of currency replacement, Bob Zadek. If all of this leads to some sort of a new, either a global or national currency, and the dollar is replaced as a result, do you see that as a possibility?
Well, when you say currency, money is rather strange. Money has no intrinsic value. It's kind of pretty, but other than that, it has no value. If you think about currency, the only value of currency is your belief, an appropriate belief, that somebody else will accept it in exchange for giving you something you want. Money has no value to you per se. It's only valuable if you have a belief that you can go into a restaurant, order a delicious meal, have somebody work to make you happy with a meal, and they will accept your currency and not shoot you in the head because they want something more tangible. They say, no, I don't want currency, I want your coat. Well, so currency itself is rather a strange phenomenon. And therefore, I don't really care that much about what currency is a tool. I don't care that much about what the tool is. And if people start to accept Bitcoin, the cryptocurrencies, if people accept anything in exchange, so long as somebody will accept it, then I know that I can accept it when I trade my labor for something. You have to have some medium of exchange in order to determine the value of something. So I am less concerned about whether there is a government issued currency. Now, there may be monetary concerns that I simply am not smart enough to know about. But if we're talking about everyday life, we lived in the early part of our country. We didn't have a national currency, or we did, but we also had bank notes. We had banks issuing currency, and people trusted Chase Bank. Chase Bank, I think, was the first bank in America. People trusted a promissory note issued by Chase Bank, and therefore that was currency. And so long as somebody else would accept it, and at the same value that I have, it's okay with me. It's only a tool so that people can exchange, have what's called mutually beneficial exchanges, and they know they're getting value for what they're giving up.
Let's go to social media, media in general, deplatforming. Again, people trying to express themselves and being shut down by some of these huge media conglomerates. Is there anything to be done about that?
I did a show on that about 3 weeks ago. It's a very interesting, and all my shows are available on my podcast, of course. It's a very interesting subject. Now, we start with the premise that social media, will use Facebook because they're in the news so much, and Twitter because they're in the news so much. They are private companies. The owners of that company and the managers who manage it on behalf of the owners, the shareholders, can do whatever the heck they want. They can depublish, they cannot carry something that I write. They have no duty in general to print anybody's stuff or carry anybody's blog or link. We start there. However, it gets a bit more complicated. And there's just like a newspaper. If I do a letter to the editor, they have no duty to publish my stupid letter that I write to them. They can say this is garbage when I could have published Zadek's letter. And I don't have a right to compel the Wall Street Journal to publish my writing. Obviously not. It's their newspaper. They can do what they want. They're trying to make a profit. On the other hand, in 1996, the Communications Decency Act was passed, and Section 230 has been described as the 27 words that save the internet. And under Section 230, this is before Twitter and before Facebook. It was just a concept. And Congress decided they had to make a decision about this nascent industry called social media. Well, what is it exactly? Because there was no analog before social media. Well, they said, is social media more like a telephone line where the telephone company is not responsible as to the content of what I say to you if I call you on the phone? They're just providing the vehicle, the platform, if you will, of those bunch of wires. Is social media more like a telephone, just a carrier of information, or are they more like a publisher, like a newspaper, which exercises editorial control of every syllable that gets printed? And they concluded, okay, so long as Facebook and Twitter et al. Do not exercise editorial control like a newspaper, then they are just a carrier and they can't be sued for defamation or other speech crimes if somebody publishes bad stuff. And so they were given the standing like a telephone rather than a newspaper. Now the trouble starts because now Facebook and Twitter, it famously and very publicly start to delist and not carry somebody, not carry Trump or put warning labels. They start to exercise some editorial control. It's not quite open to all. Well, now the question is, have they crossed a line so that now they are behaving more like the Wall Street Journal rejecting my letter? Are they behaving more like a publisher, which means now they're liable for defamation? Or are they more like a telephone line? And that's a really hard question, which the country is struggling with, because if they are determined to be a publisher, more like the Wall Street Journal, then they are liable for defamation. There will be tens of thousands of lawsuits, and the business model will fail. So we will find out how this plays out. This is still very much a work in progress. My own view is I am less concerned than maybe others about Facebook and Twitter delisting people and not carrying all the content, because I have profound respect for private property. Just like I don't have to, if you have a handbill or something you want to circulate, I'm not bound to post it on my front door. It's my property. I don't have to do it. Well, government can't compel Facebook how to run their business. I'm less concerned than others, but I find it intellectually really an interesting topic because it's developing as we speak.
Finally, Bob Zadek, let's talk about the title of your book and how do we find freedom in the post-COVID world, because it certainly appears to be constrained.
Number one is to realize that this was the first time in American history that innocent people who are not sick, innocent people who did nothing wrong and are not sick, were deprived of more liberty than ever has a country been deprived of before. We were forbidden to go to work, unheard of. Forbidden to go to church or synagogue, unheard of. Forbidden to go to a restaurant, unheard of. Forbidden to be out after 10 o'clock at night, unheard of. And the fact is, we accepted it without questioning the authority. And the way the citizens should react is, some have reacted the way that I'm going to say, and others not. There are two kinds of voting. There is ballot box voting, which everybody knows about. You vote with your ballot, but one vote never makes a difference, although elections are getting pretty close. One vote doesn't make a difference. And then there is foot voting. You say, I'm out of here. Americans don't realize that because of federalism with 50 different states, we have, like, our country is like a shopping mall for government. You have choices. You can choose the form of government you want to live under. And when Americans and when New Yorkers are leaving, 300,000 have recently left simply because the government sucks in New York and they're leaving. Well, foot voting makes a difference. It makes, for one person to do foot voting, it makes so much of a much more profound difference than ballot box voting, which nobody cares about. It doesn't affect anything. So we are seeing it happen, and we are seeing massive migration, almost like when the blacks were leaving the Jim Crow South to go to the industrial centers of the Northeast and the Midwest to get jobs, and the punishing the economies of the southern Jim Crow states. That would have continued to make a profound difference, accelerated by the Civil Rights Act, of course, in the 1960s. But foot voting is mighty, mighty powerful. Ballot box voting, not a bad idea. Foot voting, number one, you make your own life better. Number two, you send a profound and powerful message. And that's what's going to happen. So to me, it has to happen, obviously, peacefully. And it is happening, I believe, because the migration, the flows of migration are really pretty dramatic, underreported, but pretty dramatic. And California will, for the first time in its history, lose a seat in the House of Representatives under the next census. So will New York. So it's starting to happen. And I am, as I always am, because I'm so positive, encouraged that foot voting will do what ballot box voting could never do.
Bob Zadek, if people would like to get a copy of your book, Essential Liberty, or if they'd like to follow you online, tell us how they can do that.
Thank you so much for asking. The book is I have 4 books, and they aren't books that I wrote. What I've done is I've compiled partial transcripts from relevant shows on a given topic. So you don't read my words alone, you read the words of my guests, who are infinitely smarter than me. They are very cool and very wise people. And also it's permanent. You have it on your shelf. You can use it as a reference tool. You can get all my books on Amazon. It's Bob Zadek, Zadek. The podcast is The Bob Zadek Show. My website is The Bob Zadek Show. It's a live show every Sunday, a solid hour, not one syllable of commercials, always an interesting guest. It's an hour of, as I like to say, opinion, not attitude. I'm in my 14th year doing it. I'm not going to stop. There are too many smart people I still have to meet.
Bob Zadek, thank you so much for joining us today on the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. We really appreciate it.
You're very kind to have me. Thank you so much.
That concludes another edition of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Visit us online at shillingshow.com, where you can directly support this podcast by clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page and making a monthly donation. Your support is essential for the continuation of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Until next time.